this video, I am going to be sharing 5 breakthroughs that have helped me overcome depression and bring much more joy into my life. So for those of you who are new to me, who don't know my story, when I first realized that I had depression, I was in high school. And I wouldn't have exactly used those words, but in my senior year of high school, I was going through something where I basically would come home from school, would cry a bunch, would sleep a bunch, would wake up super early, do all my homework, go through the day, and just do it again. And I didn't really feel like I had a sense of purpose in my life. I felt very depleted and very drained. And I spent a lot of my time just feeling really horrible about a whole variety of situations that was happening. But that depression, or that hard time that I didn't know how to call depression, was really the beginning of my journey with my mental health. So for that whole year, things were just really rough. There were definitely high points. I wouldn't say that like everything was horrible, but that pattern of go to school, cry, sleep really early, wake up and do it again, that was basically a big period of my time when I was like 16, 17. I would say mostly 17 because this was like senior year of high school. So when I was like 17 years old. When I went to college was when I got access to a therapist. And the therapist just asked me, why are you coming in today? And I told her that I had gone through this season where I was just sleeping and crying and going to school, and that was basically my whole life. And I didn't want that to happen again. I wanted to be done with it. I didn't want that to follow me into college. And so I figured seeing a therapist would help me. And she was the one that told me that what I was experiencing was a season of depression. And starting my journey with that therapist back in 2014 was really what I consider to be the beginning of my healing journey. And that was about 10 years ago now, which is so crazy. But over the past 10 years of having different therapists and having life coaches and going through my own journey of healing depression, I have had a bunch of different breakthroughs. And my goal in this video is to share these breakthroughs with you so that if you are navigating depression, no matter where you're at on your journey, you can learn things and move farther ahead based on my journey, right? I want it to feel like my journey is accelerating your journey, because that's honestly how it has felt for me. Whenever I've read a book or listened to a podcast and someone was telling me about their journey with depression, I felt like it was leaping me along because I could see myself in their story and I could take the lessons that they had learned the hard way and apply it to myself. So I have 5 different things that once I realized these things, it was much, much easier to heal and much easier to let go of depression. And this isn't to say that every day is perfect. I would say what has changed the most for me is that when I notice that I'm in a bit of a rut with my mental health, I understand what's happening and I understand how to help myself, and a rut will maybe last like a day or two versus months and months and months on end, right? And so again, I am on a journey with this. I think for me, the progress that I've made over the past 10 years is really remarkable. And no matter where you're at on your journey, I trust that this video and that the breakthroughs that I have will help you. So the first breakthrough that I had to really integrate and that I had to realize for myself was I could not be identifying with depression. And so I went through a journey of feeling really ashamed about having depression and having depressive episodes, feeling like it meant that there was something wrong with me and like I was weak and like I couldn't handle life. Then I flipped the script and I was like, no, I have to embrace this. I have to accept this. This is a part of me. This is a part of who I am. And that, I think I overcorrected too much. And I started to really identify as a sad person, as a person who struggled, as a person who was just kind of like, who was depressed, right? And it went beyond the point of I need to acknowledge this so that I can get help, and into the territory of Samara and depression are just one and the same, and I don't know where I end and where the depression begins. And I would say I was in that point for like years, like definitely 2014, 2015, 2016, 2017, I was so deep into identifying as a depressed person, and it almost felt like I had to, and I didn't understand this at the time. This is looking back, right? Hindsight is 2020. But it almost felt like I had to be weighed down and be in hardship because it felt so tied to who I was. And so I was kind of going through the world, again, not consciously. This was all unconscious, but I can see it now. I was going through the world looking for things to be hard, like expecting things to be hard. And because I was expecting things to be hard, I feel like I made life unnecessarily hard for myself. Like I would put a ton on my plate, and then I would feel bad about myself for not accomplishing what I said I would accomplish, when I could have really just made I could have set more manageable expectations, and then I could have felt fine, right? Or whatever it was. I would surround myself with people who were not helping me, who really, if anything, made me feel othered and made me feel even more like I wasn't, like there was something wrong with me because I was depressed. Like I didn't take the steps to really heal and to help myself, aside from going to therapy, because I was so identified with the depression, and I was in such a victim mindset also. Like I was in this place of like, the world is hard and everything is hard, and that is how depression feels, right? I'm not saying this to be insensitive. Like you genuinely feel like the world is hard, everything is hard, you know, is it worth it to go on type of a deal when you're depressed. And because I did not see that as a separate kind of seasonal condition that I had, I saw it as who I was, and I didn't see the difference between me as a person and this like very, you know, temporary mental health experience. Like it's kind of like if you have a cold, you don't identify as I am the flu, or I am, you know, pneumonia, or I am whatever. You just take the medicine and you drink a lot of fluids, and then it passes, and then you move on. But for me, I was like, I am depression, basically. Like it became a synonym with who I was, and that made it very, very hard to move forward in life, and that made it very hard to really expand and to think better of myself and to see more for myself. And so the first thing I had to realize was that I was not depression. Even though I felt depressed, even though I was experiencing symptoms of depression, depression was not my identity. And once I let go of depression as an identity marker, I started to really notice the times when I didn't feel depressed. I started to notice, oh, I actually have hope today. I actually feel good today. I actually am excited about something today. And I started to notice more and more of what was helping me feel that way, and started to prioritize doing more of that. And letting that be the breadcrumb out of my depression, the little trail that I was leaving for myself out of my depression, was the most important thing that I ever did. But I wouldn't have gotten to that place if I hadn't first realized that I was too identified as depression or as a depressed person in order to really be able to make any changes. So the second shift I had to make, which is tied to realizing that I was identifying as depression and identifying as depressed way too much, was I had to shift from kind of nursing my wounds and wallowing in the depression to actually making changes. And I couldn't have had this second shift without the first shift, right? So first I had to realize I am not depression. And then I had to be able to tell the difference between wallowing and actually healing. Because I could have spent, and I did, literally, when I say years, I mean basically the whole time I was in college up until the beginning of 2018, which was when I started to actually like have these insights and make these breakthroughs. But for like a good 4 years of my life, I was wallowing in depression. I was sleeping way too much. I was watching shows and consuming content that perpetuated my perspective that I was really depressed and that there was nothing I could do about it, basically, but it was just, this is who I am and this is how I'll be forever, and I'll never be happy for a long period of time, and I'll never be fulfilled in life, and I'll never have joy. Like, I was just consuming everything that fed back to me that same story of like, you're depressed and you will be forever. And again, I would just sit in bed, consume this content. There would be days where I wouldn't even eat because I wouldn't even get out of bed to eat or to shower. And I know I'm like preaching to the choir, like, you understand what depression feels like and what it is. But as I was doing all of this, I wasn't making any effort to actually change. And I don't want to knock the fact that I was going to therapy, because I do think therapy helped me make it through that period of time, because it got very dark. But I wasn't taking my healing journey into my own hands. Like, I wasn't taking any initiative. It was almost like if I showed up to therapy and I checked the box of like, okay, I went to therapy every week or every other week, however often I was doing it, then that should be enough. And I was almost treating therapy like a pill. Like, if you take this pill, you know, everything will go away. And I even at one point, I did have antidepressants. And I don't think there's anything wrong with antidepressants. And I don't think there's anything wrong with therapy. And honestly, for me at the time, I do think having antidepressants was definitely the right way to go. And I don't, you know, I am not a doctor, and I'm not in the position to tell anyone what medicines they should be taking. But I was doing these things in lieu of actually making the choices in my day-to-day to heal. Because if you go to therapy twice a month, right, what are you doing all the other days of the month? And what are you doing all the other hours that you're not in therapy? That's literally 2 hours a month. But what was I doing right before therapy? What was I doing after therapy? Why was I showing up late for therapy multiple times? Like, I can remember multiple occasions where I would show up late to my session. The session was an hour and I would only have 30 minutes because I wasn't doing anything in between sessions to actually help myself, right? It was really bad. And I was wallowing, and I see that now. And I have a lot of love for my past self. And I really do understand that, like, in that season of life, that was the best I could do. But what I wish someone had pointed out to me was that there is a difference between you're in a bad situation, things don't feel good, and you are allowing this to grow and to go on indefinitely, basically, because you're not doing anything to stop it. And I honestly think that this didn't really come clear for me until I started to learn more about the power of your thinking and the way that thoughts that are similar kind of group together. So if you start yourself on a negative train of thought, you can ride that negative train of thought for days and days and days, and then you have to interrupt it with a positive train of thought in order to move your brain in a different direction. And a lot of times this happens unconsciously. You might be on a negative train of thought, and then all of a sudden something external happens. You get good news, or you see your favorite person, or something external happens, and then all of a sudden you're feeling better because you're thinking differently, but you don't really notice that this happened. We have to do this intentionally, because the same is true. I would have a negative train of thought, and then I would feed that negative train of thought by not taking care of my body, not eating, not sleeping well, not doing the things that I knew I needed to do in order to, like, be a functioning human being, and also by consuming all of this content that was reinforcing my negative way of thinking about myself and about life and about the world. And so all of this combined led me to be in this really, like, negative train of thought basically for years, and it made it very hard to move forward with my life, and it made it very hard to be the best version of myself, or really to be, you know, a fraction of the kind of person that I know I can be now. But at that point, I really did not have a way to access, I didn't know how to access those positive trains of thought intentionally. Like the idea of making gratitude lists, just the little things, right? Making gratitude lists, going out of my way to reflect on my thoughts, but not in a way of like, let me belabor them, but really let me see what I'm thinking so that I can nurture myself and comfort myself. Like all those little things, making sure I'm getting outside, making sure that I'm moving, all of that stuff I started to really tap into in my senior year of high school, or of college, my senior year of college. But up until that point, none of that was really on my radar, and so I was just wallowing instead of actually moving myself forward. The third breakthrough that I needed to have was no longer blaming other people for the way that I felt. So this was big because when I was definitely in this era of, let's say, this 4-year period where the depression was the worst and I was not taking care of myself and I was just doing things that perpetuated the depression, right? I was also blaming other people for why I was depressed. I did not make the connection between the choices I was making and the way that I was feeling. But I was just like, well, this thing happened in my childhood and that's why I'm depressed today. Or this thing happened as I'm saying this, I also want to be very clear, like, trauma is a real thing and it is important to heal from trauma, but healing from trauma and holding grudges against people for decades is not the same thing. And you actually can't heal, like what I found was, you can't heal and hold grudges against people at the same time. You have to be willing to let go of the grudges against the people so that you can let go of the resentment and the heaviness. And as I've worked on this, one of the things that really helped me was recognizing that the more you hold grudges against people, that's just your energy being tied up in that resentment, right? It costs a lot of energy to resent something, and especially to resent something for years and years and decades. And so the sooner you can let go and heal and actually forgive for yourself, not even to let the other person off the hook, but the more you can actually let yourself breathe, you will create a sense of lightness that you didn't realize was possible for you. But at the time, I didn't realize this. And so I was so convinced that it was everyone else's fault that I was depressed, and I wasn't taking any action to help myself heal. And so I was in this 1-2 punch of it's everyone else's fault and I'm not going to do anything about it. And that made it so much worse. And I say this because I hope that none of you are doing this, but in the event that you are, you can stop today. You can go on the journey of learning how to forgive people who've hurt you, and you can let it be something that you're doing for yourself. Again, it's not because you need to go and be that person's best friend. It's not because you owe them anything, but it's just because you owe it to yourself to see what life is like when you are not carrying around that level of resentment and hatred towards somebody else. Another thing that I've realized about forgiveness and about letting go of grudges is that oftentimes when we think that what someone else did is unforgivable, we are also being incredibly harsh and critical of ourselves. And it's okay, and it's actually important to hold ourselves to a high standard and to have integrity and to be a person of good character. But I hope that you would forgive yourself if you did something that ended up hurting somebody, if you did something that someone else didn't agree with or that someone didn't receive well. I hope that you would be able to forgive yourself. And if you would be able to forgive yourself, then I also hope by extension that you would know that that other person deserves forgiveness too. But this is a journey that I had to go on. And this is one of the breakthroughs that I had maybe a few years ago. Not way back in college, but I would say in 2023, so not even a full 2 years ago, was when I started to take it seriously to let go of grudges, because the letting go of grudges, it's just so freeing and it's so liberating, and it allows you to take much more ownership over your mental health. So that's tip number 3. I'm going to hydrate again. Staying hydrated is a free depression tip that's not even on my list, but the more hydrated you are, the better your life will be. Okay, so this actually ties into the forgiveness and the like letting go of grudges, but I started to let my healing journey be a spiritual experience. So I wasn't just focusing on psychology anymore, but I started to really lean into spiritual principles that would help me heal. And this is like a whole convoluted thing in certain ways, because I have had to go through a history of healing my relationship with God. I did not always have a close relationship with God. I did not always believe in God. I did not always have a strong spiritual practice. And so I had to kind of build that up, and building that up definitely helped me with my depression. But when I started to actually pray and ask God to help me heal, and pray and say to God, you know, this feels too big for me. Can you handle it? I know that you can handle it. And just surrendering and letting God do the heavy lifting of my healing journey for me, I've started to find that things that have felt heavy and permanent and really, really hard have resolved seemingly on their own, but I know it was God. And so if you are a spiritual person, I would encourage you to start to pray for healing in the areas where you feel very stuck. If there's someone who you're like, I can't forgive them, even though I think it would be a relief to no longer hold this grudge, ask God to help you forgive. If you're like, I genuinely can't get out of bed today and everything feels heavy and it feels like my body is moving through molasses, ask God to give you motivation. Ask God to give you your spark back, right? And actually just bring prayer into those specific situations on your healing journey where you feel stuck. That is going to help you so much. Like, that is honestly one of the biggest things. This is, again, a recent thing, 2023, 2024, but it has made a huge difference in how I navigate moments where depression does come up. I just turn it over to God, and God sorts it out on my behalf. But in order for this to really work, you have to have a relationship with God. You can't be testing God. You can't be skeptical. You can't be blaming God. Again, like, holding grudges includes holding grudges against God. If you're holding a grudge against God, you also need to work that out. And I actually have a video on healing your relationship with spirit if you think that that would support you. But no matter what, invite God into this journey. No matter how that has to look, even if you're like, ooh, God and I don't have the best relationship. If you are willing to pray about something, God will hear you. If you're willing to pray about it, God will hear you. And so give God a chance to really help you with your healing journey if that is something that is speaking to you. And then the final thing that has helped me with depression, and the biggest breakthrough that I would say I've had recently as well, is having a sense of purpose in my life. When I had no sense of purpose, and when everything I was doing felt meaningless, it was actually just so unnecessarily hard to convince myself to get out of bed, because I was going to convince myself to get out of bed to go do things that didn't matter to me, to go, whether it was like work at a job I didn't even want to do, or go be around people I didn't even want to go be around, or whatever. Like, when you're already dealing with depression, having a bunch of unfulfilling, meaningless things on your plate is not going to make it easy for you to go and get up and go seize the day, right? But the more I have infused my life with purpose and with meaning and with like things that I'm intrinsically motivated to go do, the more I have noticed that my depression has subsided. Like, I actually feel excited to go do my day now, because I spend my days doing things that I love to do. And when I didn't have that sense of purpose, it was like, well, yeah, it's understandable that you don't want to get out of bed, because look at your life. And this isn't to say that if there are things on your plate right now that do not feel exciting, that, you know, it's not worth it to try to heal, and it's not worth it to move forward with your life. But I would say, as you're implementing these tips, and as you're processing these breakthroughs for yourself, make sure that you ask God to help you find a sense of purpose, and ask God to fill your days with things that you're excited about. Because it can be a two-way street. If you are really excited to go do something, you're more likely to go do it, right? And so how can you do one thing each day that really excites you, that you feel intrinsically motivated to do? And how can you let that motivation pull you out of bed, and then maybe it'll be easier for you to do some of the things that are not super exciting? Because we all have a mix of both, right? We have some things that are super exciting, we have some things not so much. But if you can give yourself at least one thing every day that you're looking forward to doing, it will make it that much easier to get out of bed. These have been 5 breakthroughs that have helped me navigate my depression healing journey over the past 10 years. I love you so much. I hope that these tips and that these breakthroughs really support you and that you can use them in your own healing process. I will see you again very soon in another video. Take care.